some point when we were talking, one of my cats, she's the hunter, and she's always so proud when she has a prey, and usually her prey is socks or bras. But she brought in a giant cockroach under my bed. I'm gonna have to find it before I go to bed.
Oh no.
Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Kim Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study human health and disease and evolution.
And I'm Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist specializing in ancient cats.
And today we are talking about the movie Ammonite from 2020, starring Kate...
Oh, sorry. Go on.
What were you going to say?
This one, like usually Ross has a bee in his bonnet about it. I have a bee in my bonnet about this one.
All right. Do you want to summarize it for us then?
Yes. Okay. So it's a movie about Mary Anning, who was a kind of a paleontologist back before that was like a thing that you went to university for. And it was kind of more of the naturalist type of idea where people were just rich enough, or their parents were rich enough that they could just observe the natural world and call themselves a naturalist or a paleontologist or a geologist. And not very many people went to university for it. And she lived in Lyme Regis, which is in the south in Britain. And it's a area that has a lot of limestone and cliffs. And due to the weathering of the ocean and the wind, a lot of fossils would be exposed on the beach continuously. And so she made a living collecting the fossils. So she would collect fossils on the shore and sell them to tourists. And she's actually the person that tongue twister is about, that she sells on the seashore. And
What
that's
was that,
actually
Kim?
about Mary Anning.
Say it again. She what? She sells seashells on the seashore?
She sells on the seashore.
Fantastic.
Have you not heard that?
Yeah, but just not said as badly as you said it.
Oh, yeah,
I think he's teasing you.
I'm very bad with it. I can't do the Peter Piper picked a pack of peppers. I can't do that one. Pickled peppers.
That was much better than she sells seashells on the seashore.
On the seashore. So then in that, she also discovered quite a few fossils that had been unrecognized, undescribed until then. And she also was, although she wasn't formally educated, she was very good at, like a lot of the naturalists at the time, very good at recognizing patterns in geology, patterns in the biology of the fossils that she was picking up. So she was able to identify different types of fossils and what kind of animal they could be, and was able to put them together based on their anatomy. She discovered the ichthyosaur and the plesiosaur, as well as a few other things that are less well known. Because she was a woman, she was never really recognized as being a paleontologist, and she was never allowed in the Royal Academy of Science or the Royal Society of Science. And so male paleontologists and geologists would come and look at her stuff and take her fossils and describe it themselves. And sometimes they might have given her, like, this was Mary Anning found it, but most of the time she wasn't given very much props for it. And yeah, it was just kind of one of those stories. She was always a hero of mine. So when I found out that they were making a movie about her, I was incredibly excited. Me and my friends counted down. I think for 2 years we waited for this movie to come out. And it was so disappointing. So the movie, which should have been about her finding fossils, naming things, loving science, and fighting to get into the Royal Academy and all of this stuff, was not that movie. So it opens up in a very grey and horrid-looking Lyme Regis, and did not paint England well in this. It looks super depressing. She lives with her mom, which is true, but she also lived with her
I've
mom.
never been to England. Is that not just what it looks like all the time?
No.
Yeah, basically.
So in real life, she lived with her mom and her siblings, and they were quite poor, and she was bringing in, she was the eldest, I think, so she was bringing in most of the money selling the stuff that she found on the ammonites and the shells that she
on
found.
the seashore.
Yes, I was trying not to say it. And so they got that part right in the movie, that it was her and her mom and they were quite poor. But instead of just being someone who enjoys what she's doing and going out and looking for fossils because she loves it, they painted her as this incredibly miserable woman who just hated her life and didn't seem to enjoy what she was doing at all. And then we get like one scene of her fossil hunting on the beach, and then this man comes in because he's heard of her. He's a geologist or something. He wants to talk to her. She's very rude to him, even though first she thinks he's a customer at the store. So I don't think that would be true, but she's incredibly rude to him because she's just a grumpy person. He then randomly is there and gets called away for something, and then he has to leave his frail wife there. He decides that it's better to leave his frail wife there with these strangers than to make her travel to wherever he's going. So he offers to pay Marianne and her mom some money to take care of his wife, who doesn't seem to be all that sick. She was probably just hysterical. He's having female emotions that were annoying, so she needed to take some airs. And then Marianne's quite rude to her and grumpy with her for a while, and then she takes a bath in the frigid ocean in the winter, so then she gets hypothermia, so then Marianne has to nurse her back to health. And all in this happening, this is like an hour in, and this is all that's happened. Like, I'm not missing any detail of the show. There's long periods of time of stretches of her putting on her shirt and her dress and doing up the buttons and making tea and her mom boiling eggs and all of this stuff, and very little fossil focus, I found. And then so then the frail wife gets better, they start to get along, then a romance buds up, and they have some hot sex scenes, and then the wife gets better, moves back to London, and then invites Marianne to London and wants Marianne to move in with her to be her secret lover while her husband is off doing things. Marianne doesn't really like that all that much. Oh, and her mom died, so she could do this easily. She wants her own life and her own house and doing what she's doing in Lyme Regis. And yeah, that's about it. There's absolutely nothing else that happens in the entire movie. It's so boring. The only good thing about having to watch this movie again is that I actually got a lot of stuff, like, the annoying little things that you have to get done, but you procrastinate. I got so much of them done because they were better than watching this movie again, paying attention. There was... It just really, this is the BMI bonnet, is it just really pissed me off that they even had to bring in a love interest. And then not only did they have to bring in a love interest, and I understand sex sells, like, yeah, throw in some hot sex scenes, everybody loves that, but it was about the entire movie was about that. Like, the entire movie was about a grumpy Marianne who was unhappy, and then this beautiful thing comes in, she's unhappy in her marriage, and they find each other and they find some happiness, and that's great, and then it's over, and that's what the movie is about. Why wasn't the movie about her and what she did for paleontology and for her love of science? And like, why does it have to have a love interest at all? Why does a love interest have to be the main focus? It's just, I was not happy with it, and it was boring. Like, how can you take a movie about Marianne, fossils, paleontology, and hot woman-on-woman sex and make it that boring?
But you weren't concerned that they made Marianne into a lesbian, because that's where a lot of the criticism comes from about this movie, because there's no evidence that she was in real life. But that part didn't bother you?
No,
there's she wasn't either.
There's no evidence that she was heterosexual either. What the evidence is for, if you actually pay attention to her life story, is that she was dedicated to her family and to paleontology. So that should have been the focus of the movie.
Maybe, Kim, most people don't want to watch a movie about fossils. They want to watch a love story. Maybe that's why they did it.
But even then, it was fucking boring. Sorry. You're going to have to bleep that out. But then make it interesting.
We don't have to bleep it. All of our episodes are labeled as explicit. I just label them explicit whether or not we swear.
Because sex sells.
But even then, there wasn't even enough sex, and it came in so late that, like, it was already a boring movie. I would have walked out of the theater. Nobody wants to watch that.
I was saying sex sells about Josh labeling all of our episodes explicit.
Oh, explicit, yes.
Yeah.
I was just so disappointed. And even when this movie came out, I wasn't able to see it in theaters. Thank God that I didn't, for whatever I was traveling or something. Like, I can't always get to theaters when I want to. Then it came out on Netflix, and then I even saved it on Netflix for a night when it was going to be perfect. Like I had a bath, I did girly stuff, I made popcorn. It was me and Jasper. I was like ready. I had a bottle of wine, like a good bottle of wine. Like I was date night with Jasper and me watching this movie I've been waiting to watch for like 2 or 3 years, and it was horrible. Twice now I've watched it and I still think it's absolutely horrible. It actually was worse this time because the first time I at least had the anticipation that there might be something about cool coming up. Like, okay, we got to get through this boring part. It's going to get cool. She's going to fight the Royal Society. She's going to, like, the plesiosaur didn't even come into play.
Yeah. I totally get where Kim's coming from, but I actually quite liked it as a film. I mean, I totally get that. What I think is the problem is that they've kind of tied Mary Anning into what is quite a nice story. If they'd made it like an anonymous Victorian fossil hunter that had similarities to Mary Anning, I think everyone would have liked it much more, because
It would have been boring.
You know, it is quite a nice story, and it has lots of these quite good allusions. Like even what does the title particularly have to do with it? As Kim says, it's mostly this love story between these two women. But that kind of becomes clearer right at the end, where there's a really nice scene where Mary Anning's been called to London by Charlotte Murchison, and she goes to visit her in her house. And just before she kind of meets her, she's in her drawing room, and she sees that one of her ammonites that she'd collected on the shore is now labelled in a cabinet in this kind of London drawing room, where maybe a few people will see it, but not that many. And then also she kind of goes after the big bust up, where she says she doesn't really want to be her kind of kept pet in her house with this room and clothes that Charlotte's bought for her. They kind of meet again in the British Museum, where Mary Anning goes to see her ichthyosaur that she'd found, which has been bought by the British Museum and put in a display case there. And so the whole kind of the allusions to how easy it is to feel kind of trapped in a relationship, whether that is a relationship with your work. I think one thing that did ring very true to me is how pissed off Mary Anning is the whole way through, because yes, she loves fossils and she loves paleontology, but she's not allowed to kind of explore that love for her work fully, because she has to make a living, and so she has to.
If you didn't know the story of Mary Anning, you wouldn't really get that from the movie. Like nothing was really developed or delved into deep. It was all very surface boring, right? You never really got to know Mary Anning, or what's her face? Charlotte
Murchison,
who reminded me of Charlie, actually, physically, not personality wise.
Okay, but, yeah, Saoirse Ronan, who's really good in it, whose English accent in it was fantastic. I thought, considering she's has a pronounced Irish accent in her normal speaking voice, and Kate Winslet,
but even
as Mary Anning, her Dorset accent was pretty good as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that. I've not been.
But yeah, I mean, I like the idea that it's not really about Mary Anning. It's not really about fossils. It's about how people can feel trapped in kind of relationships. How they can feel like just curated objects in somebody else's life, which is not a great place to be.
Very true. But why can't we have one good movie about a kick-ass female scientist? Why? Why does it always have to get twisted into this? Like, it could have been about, if it was about a male scientist, they probably wouldn't have even brought in a love, relationship. And if it had, it would be very on the side. It wouldn't be the main focus. It would be his passion for the discipline would be his main focus.
Talking of kick-ass female paleontologists, a film which I don't think we have on Letterboxd, but which I must mention now before we forget, is The Extraordinary Tale of Adele Blanc-Sec, which is about a kick-ass female paleontologist.
Okay, let's watch that one. Get me out of this mood.
I've seen that one. It's quite kick-ass.
There is even, you bringing up about the relationship and all this stuff, there was even a point, though, when this other woman randomly comes in, who knows, she's obviously from the very droll conversation that they have with Mary Anning. You can tell that they used to be lovers, but it didn't quite work out.
She's a real character as well. That's Mrs. Philpott, who was one of Mary Anning's kind of real Mary Anning's kind of tutors, essentially. Yeah.
But she comes as a ex-lover who talks to her about Charlotte, and then she says about Charlotte, she's like, I quite liked her. She was such a good conversationalist and so funny. And you're like, We had no idea. Did we know that Charlotte was funny? Did you ever get that? Like,
No.
no. Like, at no point in time do we get to know Charlotte or Mary Anning. The only thing we know about her is that she's grumpy. And the only thing we know about Charlotte is that she takes the cold poorly.
And she's melancholic. But I mean, I get all that. But I thought it was quite good. Obviously, I know a bit about the Mary Anning story. I have a lot of respect for Mary Anning, who is, as Kim points out, an amazing historical figure that everyone should know a bit about. In fact, I have a really nice storybook that I read to my kids when they were a bit younger about Mary Anning called Stone Girl, Bone Girl, whose author I'm going to quickly look up just now, because it's a really nice story which puts it in. It's by Lawrence Anhold, and it has all these kind of amazing facts from the real Mary Anning story, like she was struck by lightning when she was a baby, which kind of is a pretty auspicious start to life.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It doesn't mention her dad at all in the film particularly, but he was a major influence upon her. He was a kind of woodworking joiner, jack of all trades who made nice furniture. But he died when Mary Anning was quite young. And it's his tools that she's using to expose the fossils that she finds. And then, the Philpott sisters, there's two of them in real life that kind of supported and taught her natural history, essentially, without any suggestion that they kind of had any kind of romantic relationship. But yeah,
and then
also,
even if they
the
did or
Murchisons
didn't, that doesn't always have to be the point of it, right? Like, people can also have romantic relationships but still have a multifaceted relationship. You don't have to focus on the love part. It can be about the fossils.
One thing that I've got to bring up, just because it has interest to me, is that I was reading a bit about Roderick Murchison, who's a real paleontologist, quite famous, involved with the delineation of the kind of Silurian period, sort of the pre-Mesozoic era. But he was actually born just right around the corner from where I am just now, so he's from Muirvord, which is like about 10 miles from Inverness, where I'm sitting just now. And he had the fantastic middle name of Impey. So he was Roderick Impey Murchison, which is not a name I've heard in any other context.
No.
But I think it must be a surname. I've seen it as a surname. Apparently it comes from Old English, meaning some kind of wooded clearing. But up here in the Highlands, the tradition often amongst kind of Highland naming is that your middle name is the maiden name of the mother or of the grandmother. So it's like one of the kind of lost middle names. So, for instance, my cousin, his middle name is McCaskill, because that was my grand's maiden name. So I think that's where it comes from. But
I think it's similar here in the Philippines too, because a lot of my documents, they think that my middle name is my first part of my first name. So
right.
I can't actually sign up for online banking because it's expecting, because if I put my middle name in the middle name section, so Kimberly, and I put Anne in the middle name, it won't let me because it thinks that my name, someone put it in, my first name is Kimberly Ann, but I can't leave the middle name section blank. And I haven't been able to get around this, so I can't get on to online banking.
That's irritating.
It's just one of those things of living in a foreign country that's just like...
Yeah, something else to learn.
What about people who don't have a middle name?
True. I mean, I don't have a middle name.
I have no idea. I could walk to the bank and talk to somebody, but I just haven't done that.
Oh.
Anyway, Ross, you talk about what's his name, Roderick Murchison.
Yeah.
We can talk about how they did Mary Anning wrong in this movie, but I didn't really know too much about his wife, Charlotte Murchison, before this. But after doing a little bit of research, like the smallest amount of research, I think that they treated her way worse than anybody else in this movie, because they paint her as this, young rich housewife who's depressed because she lost a baby. And she's just depressed and mopey the whole movie. And then at the end, she's sort of naive and spoiled, thinking that she can just buy an older girlfriend, right? But in real life, first of all, she was 11 years older than Mary Anning, whereas in the movie, she's about 15 years younger. So that's a very different dynamic. They were friends in real life, of course, and they corresponded with each other. But also, she was interested in geology herself, and rather than her husband dragging her around and trying to get her interested in it, it was almost the other way around. Her husband was, I think he was a soldier, and I don't know, he had some other rich guy jobs. But she was the one who encouraged him to get into geology and to pursue that as an academic interest. And later on in her life...
Fueling my rage. You're just like shoveling coal onto the rage.
Well, she was, again, a very prominent woman in this society at the time because... just like with Mary Anning, she wasn't allowed to be part of any of the scientific societies. She wasn't allowed to be a member of the Geological Society. And Charles Lyell, who was like, is he the father of geology? Is that what we would ascribe to him?
No.
He was the father.
But he was a big
James
tease.
Hutton.
Yeah.
James Hutton is before him. Yeah, but he is a big, important geologist, a friend of Charles Darwin, an important influence on Charles Darwin.
Father of the Ice Age, I would accept.
Father of the Ice Age, that's probably what I'm thinking
Didn't
of.
Lyell do the uniformitarianism? Is that Lyell?
Possibly.
I think maybe. Or was Hutton uniformitarianism?
Or catastrophism. This is well outside of my kind of knowledge sphere. This is geology. This is
Well, I have to teach
real
this,
deal.
so I should know it.
I think we need to take some ADHD tangents here. So what's uniformitarianism and what is catastrophism?
So uniformitarianism is it's basically kind of Popper's thesis, antithesis, synthesis in a real science. So you have the study of geology, this ancient history of the Earth, and you have these two schools of thought kind of come about. The catastrophists, who see the evidence of things like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, all these kind of dramatic geological processes, and kind of say, well, okay, these explain everything that's happened in the world. It's all these kind of catastrophes have explained why we have mountains and why we have all these other things. And then you have the uniformitarianists with the kind of idea of uniform change having caused all these things. So like erosion by the wind, by water through rivers and waves and all these kind of things, all these kind of slow, small-scale processes over huge periods of time. That's their explanation for everything on the planet. That's why we have, gullies and crevices and mountains and all these other kind of geological features that were in need of an explanation. And so you have, two kind of opposing schools of thought, both based on scientific evidence, both kind of well-rounded theories, and then it takes a bit of time before those two get synthesized and we can understand that actually, yes, some things are caused by kind of catastrophic events, things like volcanoes erupting to form new islands off Iceland or off the Ring of Fire or whatever. So there are some kind of catastrophic events that have big geological implications, but there's also lots of uniform events, things like river erosion, kind of carving river valleys, and wind erosion over time, shaping rock outcrops and things like that. So it's a really interesting story of how you assemble evidence, think that your one theory applies to everything, and it takes some time before you can kind of assimilate different schools of thought into one complete theory.
So, but my understanding of the law of uniformitarianism isn't that like what happened in the past happens today, so we can interpret what we see in geology based on how we see the Earth moving today, right?
Yeah.
That what you said, actually? Oh, okay.
I think that's a better explanation than what I said, but yeah.
It was Charles Lyell, but he made that law building on the work of James Hutton, is what Wikipedia says.
It always starts with a Scotsman.
We're both right.
I can't even remember what we were talking about before we got onto this now.
We were talking about Charlotte Murchison. Charles Lyell was a big shot in geology at the time, and he would host these lectures where women weren't allowed. And so Charlotte Murchison led several other women to protest Lyell's lectures until he finally relented and allowed women to listen to his lectures. So that's one of her major contributions.
Cool.
Outside, of course, of her academic contributions, which, of course, she wasn't allowed to publish because she was a woman. So basically, she helped contribute to her husband's publications because he did actually publish stuff. Whereas in the movie, they don't even paint him all that well. He seems like a rich guy doing his archaeological tour, just traveling around buying up cool stuff. But he was actually a geologist himself who was actually doing scientific work and publishing papers as well.
Wouldn't a way better movie be the dynamics, the relationship between these two women as they both fought the power? Like, why didn't we see a scene with her sitting there protesting the talks? Why didn't we see like all this? Like, why wasn't that would have been a way better movie?
Yeah, there's no need for her to be like a melancholic, hysterical.
No, I didn't even know she was a real person. I didn't even Google
creature.
that because she wasn't developed enough to be
No.
a real person, right?
But I think that's a common thread with a lot of the kind of stories of these, so-called great men of 19th century geology. People like Murchison, like Buckland, all these other kind of big names. Is that their wives were essentially as accomplished as they were, and often before they even thought about doing the work that they're remembered for, and then they just get subsumed. All the work that they've done gets, amalgamated and reascribed to their husbands, which is awful in no small way. And this film doesn't really do anything to help that at all.
No, and I can't believe the plesiosaur didn't come into play.
How can you not have a plesiosaur? I mean, all films should come with plesiosaurs. That's something that we can all get behind.
She discovered it. Why isn't that? That would have been an epic scene. That would have been a big thing, right? Like, it doesn't even get mentioned.
They could have discovered it together.
Yes.
Outrageous.
Yeah, I agree with Ross, though. I agree with both of you. The movie is really not a story about Mary Anning's scientific discoveries. So if you go into it hoping it's going to be that, of course you're going to be disappointed. But
not even
for what it
her
is,
personality either. Like, there's actually nothing to do with her in it. Neither of them now, right? Like, they took these two names from history and then just made it up. It has nothing to do with either of these women.
But as a movie, it's a slow movie, but I don't think it's slow in a bad way. It's just very atmospheric. It's like very intentionally slow, and it's trying to give a particular feeling, which I think it does very well. And notably, Mary Anning is miserable throughout the whole movie, or they're both pretty miserable throughout the whole movie, except when they're together, which I think is the whole point. I think they make them particularly miserable, and it's to show how miserable it would have been to be a woman at this time, and then showing how they, find happiness within that system. So I think it's all on purpose. I don't think it's a movie about fossils. I think that's the problem. I think you're expecting it to be something other than it is.
They made a movie called Ammonite about Mary Anning. Yes, I expected it to be about fossils. And then, even then, a movie about two miserable Victorian women who find each other and find happiness in each other. Fantastic. You still have to develop the characters. You still have to make us care about them. There still has to be some kind of conflict, climax. Like, there has to be something, and there just isn't.
Do you know what? I think maybe a lot of it is there, but I think the movie doesn't really hold your hand through it in the way that a lot of movies would do. And I think I like that about it as well. Like, there's not a lot of dialogue, so there's not a lot of exposition. But one of the things I really liked is the way, well, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but Mary and her mother, Molly, always polish these little ceramic figurines. And these figurines represent all of the children that Molly has lost, which is actually true as well. So Molly and whatever Mary's father's name was, they had 10 children and only 2 of them survived, Mary and Joseph. The first one was named Mary, and she died at about 4 years old because her clothes caught fire and she was burned so badly that she died.
Oh my God.
Jeez.
And Mary was named, she was born after this child died, so she was named after her older sister that had died. I think most of the others died in childbirth, like during birth or in very young infancy. And so part of why Molly is so miserable, I mean, it's not spelled out that explicitly, but it's very really clear with the way they've included this ritual of polishing these figurines every day, is that she's very traumatized by just the reality of being a mother at this time, because as Wikipedia says, the fact that they lost so many children is not really that remarkable for this era of England, where probably half of children wouldn't live past 5 years old. Mm. So, I mean, I consider that character development. I don't really know how much trauma it would be if it's, if half your kids are expected to die before 5. I feel like maybe it would feel a little bit less traumatic, but I mean, it's hard to know how it's going to feel,
I don't think so.
It depends on the person. And
yeah, I think at any time period, at any period of time, that losing kids is the kind of most traumatic thing that somebody can experience.
It would be more of whether society allows you to show that your feelings.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Another reason for Molly being miserable is that it's strongly implied that she's consumptive, that she has tuberculosis. She's always coughing, and she occasionally has blood on her handkerchief, which is a classic period drama sign that somebody has got TB. That's gonna harsh your mellow as well, I think.
And that's what Mary's father died of as well, right? When he died when he was about 45 of tuberculosis.
Yeah,
the White Plague. There wasn't very much science to talk about in this movie.
No, well, why don't we talk about whatever science we can? So what is an ammonite?
An ammonite is a sea creature that I'm sure everybody's seen it, like the coiled shell. They're beautiful coiled shells. And then it had a squid-like creature inside it. Like, was it more squid or hermit crab? Like it lives in the shell like a hermit crab, but it looks like a squid.
Yeah, it's a cephalopod. It's like the same kind of lifestyle as the nautilus, which you see around still today, but part of the kind of squid and octopus family.
Yes, but it no longer survives today, the ammonite. And they can be all different sizes. They can be little and they can be huge.
They can be all different shapes as well. I mean, the kind of curly round ones are the most common, but you get like paperclip shaped ones. You get like all sorts of weird configurations.
They're probably the most well recognized fossil. I think probably next to trilobite, like where someone would look at it, and it's the type that you could get at all the rocks and fossil stores.
Yeah, and they're good indicator fossils as well. So they're associated with different geological strata. So you can usually, if you know your geology and your paleontology, you can work out how old a level of strata is from what ammonites are in it, which is pretty cool.
And did they outgrow their shell? So that's why there's so many of them, right?
I think it's like the kind of continuous growth. So when they grow, they just add another chamber to the end of their shell.
Because I was wondering, so they just must have been very proliferative at the time. Because the reason why we have so many trilobite fossils is not necessarily because there were so many trilobites, but because they actually shed their skin as they grow. And so most of the trilobite fossils that we see is a shed skin, not the entire dead animal. So it looks like there was way more trilobites alive than there actually was. But otherwise, it just sounds like ammonites were very proliferative taxa.
Yeah, and one cool thing about them is because they're part of the squid family and the octopus family, they had ink, and so that's one of the only bits of cool science I thought in the whole film was that Mary Anning is shown.
Recognize that. Yeah,
she scrapes off where the ink sac would have been in some of the ammonites and actually uses it to make ink, which is something she did in real life. Like I think her plesiosaur drawing, the famous ink drawing she did, is made with ammonite or belemnite ink. Belemnites are another kind of squid-like creature from that time period, which has instead of an external shell, it has an internal bony kind of skeleton, which looks like a
long
kind of pen shape, long thin. So that was quite cool.
And she did actually, in real life, was the first to recognize that they produced ink. Huge biological input there into the field that just gets ignored.
Yeah, they should have done more about that in the film. That would have
Sure.
pleased Kim a bit more, I think.
So one of the most interesting parts of Mary Anning's story is like the time she was working. This is like the early 1800s. She was born in 1799, and she was collecting fossils since she was a child with her father. And then after her father died, she and her brother and her mother as well were, the most of the family's income came from collecting fossils. But this is, 40 or 50 years before Darwin's Origin of Species. And so our understanding of evolution was like almost non-existent at that time. And when like her father as a carpenter started selling these fossils, I don't think he had any idea of what they actually were, but people would buy them when they come to the seashore, just thinking they were curious little, like they were just curiosities they'd put in their curiosity cabinet. And so they didn't call them all these things initially. They all had separate different names. So the Ammonites, because they looked like a curled up snake, they called them snake stones.
Mm.
And they actually used to carve the end of it into a snake head to make it look more like a snake. And the common belief at the time was that they were somehow snakes that had turned to stone. They didn't realize they were like hundreds of millions of years old, or 100 million years old, I guess, if this is Jurassic limestone they're coming from. And the Belemnites they called, I think, devil's fingers, because they're like a long, straight, pointed shell.
Yeah.
The other thing they would find was a lot of vertebrae fossils from things like ichthyosaurs. And so when you find an individual vertebra, they called them vertebraries, which is one of my favorite words.
That's so cute.
That is cute.
Oh, why is that not my Twitter handle?
That would be a good one.
Can I change it?
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody that's listening steal that from me.
I wonder if it exists already.
Oh, we should give a shout out to our listener, Andrew Watts. Thank you for the lovely email.
Yeah, that was very nice.
Nice to know if somebody's listening and enjoys it.
Any other actual science in the film?
There was none.
Yeah, there's a little bit. If you're, like I said, it's not shoving it in your face, but it's there. When she takes Roderick Murchison out on the beach and they're looking for stuff,
yes.
They find a coprolite.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
she was the first to figure out what coprolites were. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't get the opportunity to name it. That was Buckland that named them coprolites, using her wisdom and her knowledge.
Wisdom, yes. I'm sure she probably did have a name for them, but if she didn't write it down.
Shitstones.
Like
or
no, just shitberries. I liked it when she was like nothing, beef, rock, nothing.
Yeah, a lot of scorn in that.
Yeah.
That's also extremely accurate, though, because when I work at a field school and you have new students and they bring you, what's this? That's a rock. That's a rock. That's a rock.
Mm-hmm. That's from Nando's. But I just really hope that somebody one day makes a really good movie about Mary Anning. An actual movie about her.
I guess it's tricky because, like many of these 19th century women scientists, is that they have no kind of voice of their own. The only kind of information we have is kind of refracted through the opinions of these all the boys together male scientists who were out to kind of get as much from her for as little as possible.
Yeah, true. So then why not fill the gap with something that would motivate young women to go into STEM and to fight for their voice and, fill the gaps in a way that helps, not just with long, tedious silences.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, I found it interesting, like, if you were going into this movie without knowing anything about who Mary Anning was, it would be a really interesting choice to just make a fictional movie about a woman paleontologist in the 1830s. That's just a very strange setting and a very strange conceit, which probably could never happen if it wasn't a true story.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of just a fictional love story inspired by true events where you get this backdrop, which is very unique, which otherwise would probably be impossible to write believably, right?
But I make the argument that at this point, why take this opportunity that you could to actually give this woman a voice and put, like, spotlight on her work and what she's done? And you, instead of using that opportunity to do that, you have to do it this way. Why not take a man and make his story a boring love story, right? Why does it have to be about, like, what? Okay, that's a book I need.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why you wouldn't do it that way. Why it has to be that this woman got played this way, right? Like, yes,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with making a boring ass love story set in Victorian England. Fine, a lot of people love that stuff. But why did you have to take Mary Anning's story and make it into that? Why couldn't you take
Maybe you
Mary
need to flip it
Anning's-
around. I hate Victorian era love stories, and I would never watch a Victorian era love story. But if you make it about a paleontologist, now suddenly you get me to watch the Victorian era love story. So maybe
you piss me off though, because there isn't very much paleontology in it. And then even then, again, it's not about just a paleontologist. It's not about just some unnamed woman who has an interest in it. It's about a woman who did some incredible things in paleontology and has not had the proper credence for that given to her yet. So again, you're taking this amazing story and then you're just making it into something else instead of giving it the props that it deserves. And I'm just getting really tired of that happening.
Yeah.
It's just
it's all
annoying.
Fair point. And especially since there is already a kind of good period story about Mary Anning that is a lot about her as a fossilist and about her fighting the establishment with the help of her other female friends. So
if I'm right in which book that is that one is fictional as well, right? Like it's based, it's filling the gaps to make it a story. It's not a or it's not a biographical
the book's
story about her.
Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier, who's the woman that wrote Girl with a Pearl Earring, which was also made into a really pretty good film.
That was a good film, but like the reason why I haven't read that book yet is because it's fictional, and I am less inclined to read a fictional book about a historical figure. Like I'd rather just read a biography.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say it's good, I'll read it.
It's good. I mean, if you like historical fiction,
somebody wrote an entire book about her, right?
Yeah.
They've made movies off of less than that.
Yeah, and it does give more kind of authentic kind of background and detail of how difficult it was to be exceptional as a woman in the 1830s in a world that is made by men for men.
Mm-hmm.
Which, as we've been saying all throughout, this film doesn't really do that.
No. I stand by also, though, that if you take the whole Mary Anning paleontology aspect out of it, or if I didn't know who she was or cared, I would have turned this movie off the first time I watched it. And I do like historical. I like period pieces. I like love stories. I don't like things that are gray and have the pace of molasses.
But yeah, as Josh says, it does go very much for a vibe, and that vibe is kind of slow Victorian romance.
But
and
it
I
makes
thought
you
it was
feel
quite
like you have tuberculosis at the end. Like it's just, it's.
Yeah, perhaps.
So the book that you're talking about there, the main relationship in that book, which I also have but haven't read yet, is with what was her name? Elizabeth Philpott, the one who we mentioned, who is also in the movie, who was a real friend of Mary Anning. I have another book actually called Curiosity by Joan Thomas, which is also another fictionalized story about Mary Anning.
So they had so much to work with.
There is so much. It really is amazing how little of her actual life story is in the movie, considering how many interesting things happened in her life. This book also emphasizes a fictional relationship with another real historical character, Henry de la Beche, who I also never heard of before reading this book, but who was another real geologist in English society at the time. So, I mean, there's in the last decade really no shortage of stories about Mary Anning, considering before that she was largely unknown for over 100 years. But talking about the aesthetic of the movie, look at both of these books. These books are both published in 2010, and the covers of these books are very blue and sort of somber colors, with similar fonts. They both feature an Ammonite sort of just hovering in space in between the text. If you look at the spines of the book, they both have an Ammonite on the spine. Ross's copy is slightly different from mine because I've got the hardcover of that one. But if you look at the movie posters for Ammonite, they're very similar as well. They're very blue and these somber colors. And so there seems to be just this aesthetic that people seem to intrinsically want to apply to this story, which is very interesting to me.
Victorian England and Lyme Regis, like it is supposed to be pretty gray, but it can also be quite beautiful.
Well, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Jurassic Coast, where Lyme Regis is. And it's not always miserable. But what I was going to say is that, again, back to the aesthetic, I thought it was quite interesting how the use of no music for most of the film. So pretty much the only sounds you get in the film for at least the first hour and a bit are natural sounds, so like waves and wind and kind of rocks grinding against each other, which I found quite nice. I thought it was interesting. It helped to kind of ground it as a piece of fiction. Cool.
I like the sound of her working on the fossils.
Yeah, quite scratchy. And the music only comes into it after Charlotte Murchison plays the piano for the first time, and then you start to get kind of background music, which I thought was interesting. And then, so there's quite a few scenes on the beaches of Lyme Regis, which seem to be fairly, if it's not Lyme Regis, it's somewhere nearby. So it's all these kind of quite pebbly, not sandy beaches. And then, as Kim was saying before, when she's out there with Murchison and they're trying to find fossils, and he's bringing all the wrong ones, what they do find the fossils in is the kind of rock that you do find those kind of fossils in. So it's like a bluish, slaty, kind of marly, soft, mudstone-ish, kind of not very hard, easy to crack open kind of stone, which is, if you've not been searching for ammonites on a beach, it might be not the kind of stone you'd expect to find them in. But it's they at least had the attention to detail that they showed them looking for fossils in the right kinds of stone and finding fossils in the right kind of stone.
Another interesting sort of historical tidbit was that they included a bathing machine, which I don't know if I'd ever actually seen depicted in a movie before.
A hot house, you mean?
Yeah, they had these, they called them bathing machines, I think, which were basically like an enclosed carriage, which would be pushed out into the water either by people or horses, so that you would get into it on the beach, and then you could change privately, and then they would push you out into the water, and then you could get out in the water, and this is because men and women weren't allowed to see each other in their bathing suits, I believe, right?
They didn't push her out very far, though. But also,
just as well, she almost drowned.
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought. Is it was pretty choppy to be sending her out by herself.
Not my preferred bathing weather. How they thought that would be good for her, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that is again commented on, but not in a really obvious way, is that doctors at this time used to prescribe ice baths for a lot of things. Like Darwin was, we talked about before, how he was always sickly, and he was always prescribed ice baths.
Yeah, the water cure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of like Victorian medicine, they would, okay, well, you're not feeling well, you have to go and sit in this tub of ice for 20 minutes. Oh, what? You're feeling better? You need to get out now? Oh, you'll never feel this way again? It works, right? All of a sudden, you're the healthiest person in England.
Yeah.
But the French doctor commented on it because when the doctor who came to tend to Charlotte
and fell for Mary.
Yeah, that was an interesting little aside in the movie, I guess. They never really played that out any further, I guess. What why did they have him showing an interest in her? Just to show that she was not interested in men, I guess. I don't know. But the doctor was French, and then when he asked what happened to Charlotte, they told him that she had been bathing in the freezing water. And then he sort of scornfully talked about, water torture. So it seemed like the foreign doctor wasn't subscribing to the English medicine, which I never thought about before. I don't know how widespread that practice was. Was it specifically among English doctors?
I've never heard of it being practiced anywhere outside of England.
Yeah, I think a lot of Victorian medicine is basically quackery that kind of it's all associated with particular kind of personality cults, and so the water cure was with one particular doctor who I'm going to quickly search for. So Dr. James Manby Gully apparently is the guy that was the water treatment cure, which Darwin was a big fan of and took Anne to.
No, I think it's probably similar to the lobotomy where.
Yeah, I mean, when medicine at this time is essentially a Wild West, where if you get enough kind of rich, well-connected patients that aren't killed by your treatment, then they will kind of recommend it to all their friends.
Yeah, then it works, right? This person survived.
Yeah, if it survives and makes you lots of money, then it's definitely doing what it's supposed to.
I just feel emotionally exhausted after venting. And then not only just the venting, but the waiting to vent.
Yeah. Having it kind of fester and seethe.
And then I'm never able to say anything quite as eloquently as I'm thinking about it when I'm festering. But
yeah, I mean, have we talked about Charlotte's melancholia as diagnosed? The whole reason why she's in Lyme Regis with her husband, it's not really fully talked about, but. Yeah,
the only thing I can think of is there's a scene at the beginning when her husband gets naked and she's lying in bed. Obviously they're going to have their marital sex and she looks at him naked and she just looks and looks away. Like she's just not excited about anything. She doesn't like the look of him. She's just kind of going to grit her teeth to get through it. So it might be that she's
think of England.
Not attracted to men and she's in this heterosexual marriage and she's actually attracted to females. So it might just be that, right?
Well, I mean, in that scene as well, there's when she kind of looks like she's initiating intimate times with her husband, and he kind of very quickly says, "Now's not the time for another baby," and then turns away. So my thoughts were that her melancholia stems from either stillbirth or loss of child in infancy, it's kind of mirrored with Mary Anning's own mother as well. But yeah, both reasons could be
it could be that you're stuck in this marriage that you don't want to be in, and you're not even getting the children out of it, right? The main reason not the main reason for heterosexual marriage, but that's the idea, right? Is that you would have children.
At that time, certainly, at that time.
And if that's not working, plus you're not happy, it would be pretty brutal. And going through that and not feeling connected to your partner, so you also don't have anybody to really feel that loss with either.
So what's our final review of this movie? Are we going to come together on this one, or are we going to have separate views?
I think we should give the final word to Kim.
I hated this movie. The first time I watched it, I hated it again.
I think I understand why Kim hates it, and I think that they certainly went wrong by choosing to tie it to real people's lives. I think it would have worked much better, as Josh said, inspired by kind of real life, but with just a kind of stand-alone imaginary female paleontologist from that time period telling her story with no kind of historical figures attached to it. I think it would have worked much better that way.
Or just made a better movie.
Kind of like Inherit the Wind, where it's clearly based on real events, but all the characters have different names.
Absolutely, that's the route they should have gone, I think. So then, and there's no downside to that. Then you can kind of find the interesting bits that are true to life. Say, oh, that's from that, but then you don't have the baggage of saying, well, did the real person do this? It just kind of detracts from it by having to second guess yourself. Say, well, did this really happen or did it not? Is that what they were really like, or isn't it? Whereas if you have, inspired by characters, if you have the Inherit the Wind style kind of screenplay, then you kind of bypass that issue completely.
Yeah, I like this movie, and I think it's worth watching if you're in the mood for like a pretty slow, atmospheric movie.
You're having
I think it's
trouble
really well done
at night, going through an episode of insomnia.
Well, I don't know. Some of the scenes were pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, but later you'd already be asleep by then, right? Like it takes too long to get to the hot sex.
The sex is surprisingly hot. It was
very
much
hot.
more
It
graphic
comes out of
than I was
nowhere because
expecting.
you're like, oh, it's gonna be even boring sex once it gets there, and then you're like, whoa, that was very well done, but too little, too late. Should have been right from the start.
One of the things where I don't know how much of like modern sensibility I'm applying to people in the past. Like this whole idea, like every generation thinks they're the one that invented sex and they're always surprised that older people were doing it. But like the Victorians were so sexually repressed. I was very surprised that they just, it seemed like they were very experienced at what they were doing there.
Yeah. I think this is a classic kind of, the Victorians were not repressed. The Victorians were freaks. They just gave the impression that everything was like absolutely kind of vanilla. But, you have to remember during Victorian times, you had people getting tattoos for the first time, upper class people getting tattoos. Like Winston Churchill's mother had a tattoo. You had nipple piercings being a phase, not a phase, but a fashion amongst Victorian men and women. Genital piercings happened during Victorian times. You have, the huge kind of underground kind of gay scene, which is explored a little bit in the kind of history of Oscar Wilde and the sort of circles that he moved in as well. So I think, Victorians were not repressed. They just hid it very well under this veneer of kind of Victorian prudery. But they were absolute freaks underneath it, I think.
But is it the same for men and women, though? Because women were a lot more isolated. So, I mean, it would be easy for Oscar Wilde to be very promiscuous. But for women who, aren't even allowed access to, most things without their husband.
If you Google right now Victorian era pornographic photos, you can see that it's the same as today.
Yeah. But also, I mean, back to Josh's point about possibly it would be more difficult for women to move as freely as upper class men like Oscar Wilde did. But there's a really interesting book which has also been made into a series about a real person called Anne Lister, who was I think a Yorkshire woman who came from money, but who wrote a diary in code, which was only kind of translated and published like 200 years after she wrote it. She was living in the late 18th, early 19th century. And her diary is basically a list of her lesbian conquests. Like she was moving around in the kind of rings of landed gentry in Yorkshire in the early 19th century and seducing her way around all these essentially people like Charlotte in this film, dissatisfied wives whose husbands were away and not pleasing them in the way they wanted to be pleased, and she kind of took advantage of that. So definitely maybe it was less common amongst kind of opportunities for women than for men, but it was definitely happening. And they've turned her Anne Lister's diaries into a BBC series, which is on iPlayer, called Gentleman Jack, which I think also got some good reviews and probably has some of the same actors in it as Ammonite did.
So it's more historically accurate than I was expecting.
Possibly,
and if you do look up Victorian pornographic photos, you can see kink definitely in there too. So it's not just
Oh yeah.
that, but there's definitely what people would probably consider modern kinks.
I'm pretty sure there's nothing that you could
Nothing
find today
modern.
that you wouldn't be able to find in Victorian etchings. I mean, this is all becoming very Blackadder, and
Yes.
there's, all the way through what I've been thinking of while watching Ammonite is the quote from Blackadder III about Blackadder's book that he's written, which was Edmund, A Butler's Tale, a huge roller coaster of a novel in 400 sizzling chapters. A searing indictment of domestic servitude in the 18th century with some hot gypsies thrown in. I mean, it looks like somebody's read
Nice.
that and decided to just take the same approach to the Mary Anning story.
Yep. I'm just going through Victorian pornographic photos. Some of them are so beautiful.
You are going to end up on a watch list, Kim. Be
I
careful.
Well, some of them would be really beautiful paintings, like just the ones of the women laying down.
Well,
and
that's
stuff.
one of the ruses they use, is that these kind of tableaus that they said they would get models around to pose as classical scenes in tableaus so that artists could paint them. But really, not a lot of painting went on. It was just taking the photos and then handing them out to their friends.
Yeah, when you're traveling alone, especially through Europe, you get a lot of street artists who want you to come back to their place, and they'll photograph you naked, and it's nothing weird, they promise. They just want to paint it. And you're like, has that ever worked? And then also none of your paintings out here are of naked women. So like these are all like landscapes, right?
Mm-hmm. If you look very closely, there may be one like hidden in the hills.
It's like just a stick figure.
It's just, which countries were these? I think you're kind of painting Europe unfairly with a very broad brush. Which countries did this happen to?
The funniest one was Austria, in Vienna.
So it happened in multiple places. Jeez.
Prague, I think it happened, and maybe Paris.
Wow. I must have lived a very sheltered life because no one's ever
Well, it's just when you're a woman traveling
paint
alone,
me.
and then I always, when I'm interested in buying a piece of art, I like to talk to the artist if it's really, and like I've made cool connections that way, and follow a lot of cool artists. But then sometimes it goes the other way. But yeah, the funniest guy was Vienna. He was the one that promised me that he would burn the photos after he painted them. Almost.
Wow. Man, huh?
And I'm just going to say for the record, I've never done that. I've never gone home with a street artist that I met randomly to take nude photos to paint. That's how you end up dead.
We started ending this episode about 10 minutes ago. Do we have anything to actually end on here, or should I just trail this out over music?
Well, just, I think the moral of the podcast is never go home with an artist who wants to paint you naked. I think that's...
Well, I don't know about that. No. I think I wouldn't say that. That could be a great love story or just a great night. Go with your gut feeling. And if it's a street artist on this, get to know them first.
Did you guys catch the little nod to Titanic in this movie where Charlotte is sleeping in the bed and Kate Winslet sketches her?
No.
As Leonardo DiCaprio did to her in Titanic? I'm sure that was an intentional reference, right?
Yeah,
There's no other
probably.
reason to put that in there.
Would have been better if Kate told Charlotte that there wasn't enough room on the bed or something, and she had to sleep on the floor. That would have been better. Nod to Titanic. I think I'm gonna paint some ladies, Victorian pictures.
All right. I hope your computer doesn't get raided by the authorities.
Oh, being a bioarchaeologist, I Google way weirder stuff.
It's just research. It's just research.
Yeah. Well, the worst is that when you forget to put archaeology, so you like Google like syphilis, and go to image, and you're like, no, archaeology syphilis.
Oh, jeez.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.